Wir müssen das Mutterland schützen. Halten! Frame of reference plays a significant role in the theological systematic study of Revelation, as well as in the human ability under psychology to comprehend aspects of reality, an Aristotelian notion perceived by our limited senses. And the simple image of just the washing of hands may impose a bias upon the person to whom that innocuous image is presented. Stage magicians often exploit this vulnerability through direction and misdirection. And at the beginning of a pandemic crisis in Virginia, while many were found hoarding products like hand sanitizer, an image of such routine conduct might immediately be associated by most with common sense notions of personal hygiene, while perhaps only a few, deeply immersed in the Lenten rituals of a devotional practice, may have at least entertained a stream of consciousness allusion to the trials of an innocent man before the Roman governor of the province of Judea, Pontius Pilate. Yet oddly, were one to take a mental journey back to an America during its foundings in the 18th century, it may surprise even modern rationalists to even fathom that the act of bathing, that which today is considered a regular sanitary practice, was perceived, based upon contemporary notions, as more of a luxury. And even for some in the scientific community, the enlightened ones, as a causative element of disease transmission. Recall that modern germ theory did not arise until the next century with the discoveries of Louis Pasteur around the time of the American Civil War, when the association of biological particles discovered by Robert Hooke in the 17th century, cells, were finally comprehended as a possible means by which a disease condition might arise in a human host. And the discovery of viruses, the most abundant biological particle in the world, would not emerge until just before what is often described as the American century, or the 20th century, when American technological progress began to blossom like spring with the incandescent light bulbs in Menlo Park, the dawn of aviation at Kitty Hawk, and the marriage of the combustible engine with the automobile, inventions a century apart, with the modernized manufacturing techniques of interchangeable parts to create the Model T, permitting economies of scale to mass produce a means of conveyance affordable for the common man. And during the dawn of the Age of Reason, while deists like Jefferson, an enlightened man in his time, was ripping the references to miracles from his personal Bible, it may, in the modern age, seem almost laughable that were you to ask him, Thomas Jefferson, about the cause of diseases like cholera in his day, he would have replied that it was common sense that diseases were caused by miasmas or vapors and ill-defined emanation from rotting organic matter dispersed in the air. None of this material should be new to anyone who has graduated at least from high school in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where 89% of the age-eligible adults from over 8.5 million citizens have both attained the credential of a high school diploma, but also will reside in a household with a computer, even if only 82% have access to the vast stores of information available on the internet. And all of this foundational knowledge would be presumed to be known at the time of discovery of an emerging public health crisis in the central mainland of China in December 2019, if not upon the arrival of a pandemic pathogen in the Commonwealth at Fort Belvoir at the beginning of March, that has today been attributed to almost 200,000 laboratory-confirmed cases, over 13,000 hospitalizations, and the deaths of over 3,700 residents, over half of whom were the elderly residing in nursing home facilities, a population at high risk that was known to the world community almost from the very beginning of the public health crisis, but which even the nation's only physician serving as a state governor, Ralph Northam, was somehow unable to prevent, despite the publication of resources by the World Health Organization in late February in the event that the condition was caused by an infectious pathogen, which even they, after the review of the tracer contacts from over 55,000 laboratory confirmed cases of infection, could not find, finding in fact an attack rate for incidents of secondary infection less than 5%, which puzzled even them at the time. All published a month before, Governor Northam took the extreme approach to lock down the entire state in a cordon sanitaire protocol, which the Assistant Deputy Director for the World Health Organization stated was a measure of last resort and which would invariably lead to the deaths of any clustering of individuals confined in close connection for extended periods, just as had been the results among farming families in the 42nd largest city in the world and the largest city in the central mainland of China. Yet, if you find yourself feverishly scrambling to take notes on this basic knowledge, you may find some consolation that it was not until 4 months before the election, according to his campaign website, the Democrat Party nominee Joe Biden first began to develop a systematic plan to address the pandemic and reverse its spread, while on March 2nd, the Assistant Deputy Director of the World Health Organization told a reporter with whom he had participated in a candid interview, "I think people aren't paying close enough attention in a pandemic crisis." By the end of that month, a consortium of scientists at Oxford University wrote, "What can be assumed by this post is that no one really knows what is going on, least of all governments and professional associations, which seems at odds with news outlets as to how many of their members have died. As our grandfathers used to say, when you do not know what is going on, do nothing." That is what we plan to do from our privileged position. Observe and monitor the situation without jumping to conclusions. And so even scientists at Oxford University weren't solely blaming the American president, Donald Trump, for the problems in a pandemic crisis. Information that you would only know if you not only used the internet, but also knew how to look for truth and answers in that vast haystack of information. And this is the dispositive distinction between mere knowledge or even its access and actionable wisdom. The difference between that which is collected as mere data inputs or processing in a program and actual analysis thereof. And this systematic process of analysis becomes most essential for you during a time of potential leadership transition and a determined intent to begin distribution of purported curative vaccines, which have never been studied for long-term effects. A concern that even caused the illustrious Dr. Fauci to withhold approvals for experimental treatments for persons diagnosed with infection from the HIV virus back in the 1980s, and which may not actually have any effect at all, given incidences of reinfection on Guam by the sailors aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt. The current plan, which even Senator Mark Warner stated during the candidate debates that he would endorse if Fauci said so, would be to distribute the vaccinations to those who are known upon the evidentiary record to be the most vulnerable and presumed to be the most at risk, or the elderly and infirm in nursing homes, a population about whom even AARP did not take note of a tragic fatality rate until the end of August and proposed legislation to correct structural ills. But also public transit workers and shop clerks, primarily persons of color, and those determined to be essential workers, primarily low-wage earners, who are employed in professions that require frequent contact with the public because the public must be protected, which on cursory examination might appear to be a logical conclusion, even if they had been neglected for nearly 9 months as the infections took hold in America, making it the leader in worldwide fatalities and hospitalizations. But if you are a discerning person, and I pray you are, one would first have to ask, why might it be now that suddenly the last in pandemic have suddenly become the first in priority? If essential workers engaged in frequent contact with the public had experienced a high hospitalization and fatality rate before now, why hasn't that development ever been reported in the press? In America, we know of record, even lower wage persons employed in nursing homes for the elderly and in hospitals have not found any outbreak levels of infection, nor in the apartment complexes in which they are presumed to dwell. And if a vaccine fails to prevent the spread of infections amongst the identified persons presumed to be at the most risk and alleged to be vulnerable to infection, what is the contingency plan to address if that plan fails? It might reasonably be concluded, based upon the COVID-19 response to date that has been implemented by Dr. Ralph Northam and endorsed by Joe Biden, as well as Dr. Fauci, that a plan to contain the virus and its infection would have to be implemented with decisive swiftness to contain the spread of infection and flatten the curve and protect the public. And one might reasonably expect thereafter a national response to provide a mass quarantine facility, albeit perhaps not quite as luxurious as the hotel accommodations acquired by the sailors in Guam, even if that plan also of record fails to prevent the rise of infections over a 3-month period from 155 to 1,417 laboratory-confirmed cases, and is now projected to have infected over 2/3 of the crew members assigned to the USS Theodore Roosevelt, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier under the command of Captain Brett Crozier, who Joe Biden has even suggested should have received a commendation for his decisive leadership and not have been relieved of his command as President Trump had supported. Yet just in the last century, even though a chosen people have stated that they will never forget, it was indeed the Germans who had advanced a germ theory about an uncontrolled pestilence, and those National Socialists are only today held in notorious contempt for their crimes against humanity, unnoticed by the world, while for their clinical and scientific attempts to flatten the curve of infection and rampant pestilence that went through its course and took place out of view, unnoticed at the time. A magician knows that you cannot see that which is not revealed, while the wise man knows that you cannot even fathom that which you do not know, nor possess the ability to attain that understanding. My name is Major Mike Webb, and By God, I am running for governor of Virginia. I ask every Christian, every conservative, every Republican, every Virginian, and every true American to, like the motto of the infantry, follow me, and we shall overcome. Honest. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb. Mach schnell! Wir müssen das Mutterland schützen.